This is a new podcast from Alpha Business Media. Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into something incredibly urgent. It's a groundbreaking ABM exclusive report, and it's titled Code Red for the Himalayas. Now, when most of us think about climate change in the Himalayas, well, our minds jump straight to melting glaciers.
Right, that's the headline image usually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's critical, absolutely. But this report, it pulls back the curtain on something, well, far more profound and immediate, actually. It reveals this deeper cascading crisis that's already unfolding across vital sectors of Nepal.
Cascading.
Yeah, the agriculture, hydropower, tourism, even public health.
Wow, so pretty much everything.
It's not just an environmental problem, you see. It's more like a systemic unraveling of a nation's foundations.
Okay.
Understanding this helps us grasp how one environmental threat can sort of systematically disrupt, well, every aspect of a country's life.
Right, it really drives home the interconnectedness.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So maybe let's start by setting the stage with Nepal's extreme vulnerability.
Good place to start.
Because this isn't some abstract threat, lurking in the future. For Nepal, climate change is, well, it's a harsh reality today.
Already happening.
Yes. The country is incredibly exposed. It's actually among the top 10 countries most affected by climate disasters, according to the Global Climate Risk Index.
Top 10, that's high.
It is. And the forecasts are pretty alarming. Temperatures there could rise by 1.2 to 4.2 degrees Celsius by the 2080s.
Wow, and that's much faster than the global average, isn't it?
Much faster. And we're talking about potential economic losses, somewhere between 2.2% and 7% of annual GDP by 2050.
Huge numbers.
Huge. That's if decisive adaptation measures aren't taken. These are estimates for the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank.
And the human cost must be immense.
Absolutely staggering. Roughly 80% of Nepal's population already faces these climate threats.
80%. Just think about that. And, what's striking here is how these big macro-level stats, they really underscore the systemic nature of the crisis we're talking about.
Right.
It's not just environmental indicators on some chart. It's the daily struggle for, well, the vast majority of people there.
Day-to-day life.
Exactly. These numbers give us that stark context for the cascading failures the report outlines, shows just how pervasive and immediate the threat really is.
Right, to their livelihoods, their safety. So where do we see this crisis hitting hardest first? I mean, where does this cascade begin?
Well, the report really points to the land itself.
Agriculture.
Yes, agriculture. It's the backbone of the country, isn't it?
It really is. Not just an industry, it's the social fabric.
Definitely.
Employs what? Over 60% of the workforce?
That's right. And contributes about 24% of GDP. For millions in rural areas, farming isn't just a job, it's their whole way of life.
And historically, Nepalese agriculture has relied on predictable monsoon rains. But that predictability,
I vanished.
it's gone. The monsoons are now highly irregular.
How so? What does that look like?
Well, they might start late. Or they bring way too much rain too quickly, causing terrible floods. Or conversely, they can be too weak, leading straight into drought.
So extremes at both ends.
Exactly. And rice production, their main food crop, is incredibly sensitive to these shifts. The data even puts a number on it. A mere 1% change in monsoon rainfall. That leads to a 0.34% change in agricultural GDP.
That's quite a direct link.
It is. And it's not just the monsoons. We're also seeing warmer, drier winters.
Okay, and that impacts?
Winter crop yields. They're reducing, which then increases food insecurity for millions.
So pressure from both main growing seasons.
Yes. But, beyond the erratic rain, what about the water sources themselves? Is the actual supply diminishing?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. And the report found something truly alarming there. A national survey over the past 25 years. Get this, 78.3% of households noticed streams and rivers becoming shallower.
Wow, over 3/4.
And 55% noticed wells and springs actually drying up.
Drying up completely.
Yes. This is a direct, almost existential threat to the 75% of Nepalese agriculture that relies on rain-fed systems. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, rising temperatures aren't just messing with water availability. They're also opening the door to new biological threats.
Like pests and diseases.
Exactly. They're migrating to higher altitudes now, areas that used to be protected by colder climates. Not anymore.
So new problems for farmers in new places.
That's right. About half of households reported new crop diseases, and over half, about 53.9%, reported new insect pests. And it's particularly bad in the mountains. 68.7% of households there are experiencing this. It's turning these once safe, high mountain ecosystems into new hotspots for agricultural risk.
And what are the economic consequences of all this, adding it all up?
Well, they're devastating. In agriculture and related industries alone, just over the past 5 years, the direct losses are estimated at a staggering 415.44 billion Nepalese rupees.
Can you put that in perspective, like U.S. dollars?
That's about 3.1 billion U.S. dollars.
3.1 billion, just from agriculture.
In 5 years, yeah. And this economic devastation, it's a major push factor for migration.
Makes sense, if you can't make a living.
Exactly. When farming, the main income for 60% of the people, becomes unprofitable, what choice do they have? People leave.
Is there direct evidence linking climate change and migration?
Yes. Studies in areas like Mustang, for example, clearly show a direct link. Climate-induced water shortages, falling crop yields, it directly influences people's decision to leave home.
And this creates a kind of vicious cycle.
A truly chilling feedback loop, actually. Climate change leads to agricultural decline,
Right.
which then forces young, working-age people to leave villages for cities or even go abroad.
Leaving fewer people to farm.
Exactly. It depletes the rural workforce, lands get abandoned, they degrade even faster, making the remaining agriculture even more vulnerable.
So climate drives migration.
And migration exacerbates agricultural vulnerability. It's potentially exporting Nepal's most valuable resource, its youth, leaving behind this hollowed-out agricultural sector. It's a critical national security challenge, really.
That's a really powerful insight. Okay,
Right.
So from the fields, let's pivot now to the energy sector.
Right? Hydropower.
Specifically Nepal's ambitious strategy to leverage its green gold hydropower. The government has these, well, really bold plans. They want to increase installed capacity from around 3,500 megawatts now to an astounding 28,500 megawatts by 2035.
That's a huge jump.
Massive.
Yeah.
And a big chunk of that, 15,000 megawatts, is planned for export.
To India and Bangladesh, right, as an economic engine.
Exactly. But here's the irony. This very strategy, designed for energy security, is under direct attack from climate change itself.
How so? What's the main threat there?
Well, the most acute, the most catastrophic threat comes from something called glacial lake outburst floods, GLOFs.
Ah, yes, GLOS. Heard about those.
Accelerating warming in the Himalayas is creating thousands of new, unstable glacial lakes, often just held back by loose piles of rock and debris, moraine dams.
Unstable dams.
It's highly unstable. Nepalese authorities have already identified over 20 such lakes as posing a high risk of bursting.
And when they burst?
It's not just a flood. It's a gigantic torrent water, mud, boulders, wiping out everything downstream for up to 100 kilometers.
Including infrastructure.
Including multi-billion-dollar hydroelectric plants, power lines, entire communities. We've seen grim reminders like the 1985 GLOF at Digsa Lake. It completely destroyed the nearly completed Namche Dam.
Wow.
So GLOFs aren't just natural disasters. They're direct existential threats to Nepal's entire energy and economic future. One event could wipe out a decade's worth of investment.
Catastrophic. But beyond those sort of sudden disasters, are there more chronic threats, too?
That's a good point.
Yes, absolutely. Beyond those acute events, there's a second more chronic threat, the increasing unpredictability of river flows.
Ah, related to the monsoon issue.
Exactly. Climate change is making flows far more extreme. Monsoon flows might actually increase, bringing higher flood risks.
Okay.
But winter and spring flows, they're projected to decrease significantly.
And that's a problem for hydropower because...
It's a critical issue because Nepal's power system is largely dominated by what we call run-of-river plants.
Meaning they don't have large reservoirs?
Precisely. They generate electricity directly from the river's natural flow. So while they're efficient during the wet monsoon...
Output plummets in the dry...
Certainly. Which means, despite all this massive hydropower potential, Nepal actually has to import electricity from India during winter months.
Really? Even with all those rivers?
Yes, to cover the deficit. Studies on rivers like the Budi Gandaki show power generation losses during dry seasons can hit 40%.
40%. That creates huge uncertainty for investors, surely.
Absolutely. Massive financial risk.
And how do these climate risks interact with the whole geopolitical situation? Because Nepal's neighbors are key here, right?
Yeah, this raises an important question. Nepal's main power market is India. There's an agreement to purchase 10,000 megawatts over the next decade.
Okay, sounds good.
India has a policy. They prohibit purchasing power from projects where Chinese companies have helped build or finance them.
Ugh. That complicates things.
Massively. It puts Nepal in a really difficult spot. Either attract Chinese capital and technology, but risk losing access to the Indian market.
Or focus solely on India, limiting their strategic options.
Exactly. So the climate crisis, it sort of becomes a tool, or at least a complicating factor, in this geopolitical game between India and China. It increases investment risk, makes financing more expensive, more difficult. International investors like the World Bank or the ADB, they see Nepal's main energy asset exposed to both catastrophic failures like GLOFs and this chronic inefficiency from flow variability. It just multiplies the risk premium, makes that dream of green gold much more complex than it seems on the surface.
Okay, so from the fields to the power plants, climate change is really reshaping Nepal's potential. And that brings us, I suppose, to another pillar of its economy. Tourism.
Yes, another critical one.
It provides a big chunk of GDP, hundreds of thousands of jobs, especially in remote mountain communities where it might be the only source of income.
Often is, yeah.
But climate change is directly attacking the very product Nepal offers, isn't it? The landscapes, the trekking.
That's right. Nepal's global brand is built on that iconic image. Majestic, snow-capped Himalayas.
But that image is, well, literally fading.
Fading, yeah. Rising temperatures are causing glaciers to retreat rapidly, reducing snow cover significantly.
So those famous white peaks.
Increasingly revealed as bare black rock. The Khumbu Glacier, for instance, right on the Everest Base Camp route.
Yeah.
It's thin significantly, and it's retreating at an astonishing rate, about 30 meters per year.
30 meters a year. That's incredible.
And along with this, aesthetic degradation, the physical danger for trekkers is growing too.
How so?
Melting permafrost, it destabilizes mountain slopes, so you get a sharp increase in landslides, rock falls, avalanches.
On popular routes?
On popular routes, yes.
Yeah.
Places like the Everest and Annapurna regions. And the weather itself is just becoming way more unpredictable. Unexpected heavy snow, storms, they can strike even during what used to be peak tourist seasons. Remember the 2014 Annapurna Circuit disaster?
Vaguely, yeah. What happened?
A sudden, massive snowstorm killed 43 people, trekkers and guides. A stark example of this new, dangerous reality.
God, that's awful. It must change the whole feeling of being out there.
Completely. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? Navigating those trails now, knowing the risks have fundamentally shifted.
And these threats, they don't just put lives at risk.
No, they make routes impassable, disrupt travel plans, significantly increase the cost of rescue operations, too.
So what's the broader impact, then, on the local communities who depend on this?
Well, the impacts extend beyond just the trails. Flora and fauna are being forced to migrate higher, altering the biodiversity that attracts ecotourists.
Okay.
And startlingly, new species are appearing in the highlands, like mosquitoes. Never seen before in some of these areas.
Mosquitoes at high altitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the economic impact on local communities, the Sherpas, the guides, porters, guest house owners, it's direct and devastating.
Their livelihoods depend entirely on it.
Entirely on a steady flow of tourists and predictable conditions. Climate change is dismantling this fragile economic ecosystem.
It's like brand destruction, as the report calls it.
Exactly. It undermines Nepal's unique selling proposition, threatens to collapse these narrowly specialized local economies. A village at 4,000 meters, they have few alternative income sources.
Right.
When trails get too dangerous, scenery loses its appeal, guest houses empty, guides lose jobs, local economic collapse.
Which then fuels more migration, presumably.
Precisely. Linking the tourism crisis back to nationwide depopulation and brain drain. It's all interconnected.
That's a truly powerful and tragic connection. Okay, finally, let's delve into an aspect that's maybe often overlooked, but crucial. Public health.
The invisible epidemic, yeah.
Nepal's health system, especially in rural, mountainous areas, it's already under-resourced, right?
Oh.
Vulnerable to shocks.
Yeah, much so.
But now climate change is hitting it from, well, an unexpected direction, creating new crises it's just not prepared for.
What's the clearest evidence of that?
The most striking thing is probably the spread of vector-borne diseases.
Mosquitoes again.
Mosquitoes again. Illnesses once confined to the hot, tropical lowlands are now creeping into high-altitude areas. Dengue fever cases, for instance.
Really? Dengue high up?
Sharply rising. The 2022 epidemic was the largest in Nepal's history. Cases reported in all 77 counties, including highland regions previously considered too cold for those mosquitoes.
And this is directly linked to warming.
Confirmed by the IPCC, yes. A direct consequence of global warming.
Wow. What else?
At the same time, you have waterborne diseases like cholera and diarrhea on the rise.
How does climate affect those?
Two ways, really. Heavy monsoon rains pollute drinking water supplies. But conversely, droughts concentrate pollutants in the remaining water, so it's a double threat.
A double whammy.
Yeah. But beyond these physical illnesses, the report talks about deep psychological scars.
Ah, the mental health impact.
Yes. Farmers losing harvests, communities forced to leave home due to floods or landslides. It causes extreme stress. There are even terms for it now, like eco-anxiety, that chronic fear of environmental disaster, and solastalgia.
Solastalgia, what's that?
It's a kind of melancholy, a bitterness caused by the loss of one's home environment, the place you feel connected to.
I see. That makes sense. Profound loss.
And these conditions are linked to increased rates of depression, anxiety disorders, even suicide, particularly among vulnerable rural people losing livelihoods and their identity.
This sounds like a system just about to break. How is the medical infrastructure actually coping with all this?
Well, that's the thing. This influx of new health threats is putting enormous strain on an already under-resourced system.
Especially in the mountains.
Exactly. The medical infrastructure there, it's simply not equipped to deal with outbreaks of tropical diseases like dengue. They lack diagnostic equipment, medicines, trained personnel.
And the cost must be huge.
Enormous. Nepal's National Adaptation Plan estimates they need around US $500 million by 2030 just for preparedness for climate-sensitive diseases.
$500 million just for disease preparedness.
Yeah. So climate change, it's acting as both a disease vector and a stress multiplier. It creates this complex, interconnected web of physical and psychological problems.
That places an unbearable burden on the nation.
Exactly. It highlights how, say, an outbreak in a remote village doesn't just affect the sick. It overwhelms local health centers, depletes medicine stocks, requires expensive emergency responses.
So a remote crisis ripples through the entire system,
causing widespread breakdown. It's truly systemic. So, after all that, what does this all mean for Nepal? Our deep dive into this ABM report, it really shows that climate change, there isn't just a collection of isolated problems, is it?
Not at all. It's a single systemic crisis, causing a devastating chain reaction.
Right. The same warming trend triggers this cascade of failures. Agriculture collapses, leading to migration, malnutrition.
Vulnerable hydropower threatens energy security investment.
Tourism degradation devastates local economy.
Diseases overload fragile health systems.
It's crucial to acknowledge, though, the Nepalese government is aware. They've drafted ambitious documents, like the National Adaptation Plan for 2021-2050. They even have a carbon neutrality goal.
Right, the plans exist on paper,
Right.
But the report highlights this huge gap between the plans and actual implementation.
Yeah. Why is that? What are the main drivers of that gap?
Primarily two things, it seems. First, significant financial restrictions. Nepal needs, $46 to $47.4 billion by 2030 just for adaptation and mitigation.
That's a colossal funding gap.
Colossal. And second, institutional weakness. Constant political instability, bureaucratic hurdles, lack of coordination. It all hinders effective project implementation.
So putting it all together.
Zooming out, yeah.
Yeah.
It means the way forward requires more than just adaptation. It needs a fundamental rethinking of Nepal's whole development model.
Rethinking the model itself.
Yes, and for investors, policymakers, international partners, this translates into a critical shift in focus. We need to invest in resilience, not just traditional infrastructure.
So what would that resilience look like in practice, say, for each sector we discussed?
Okay, well, for energy, it means diversifying, moving beyond just massive hydro. Think smaller, decentralized projects, energy storage systems, things less vulnerable to GLOFs and those unpredictable river flows.
Makes sense. Less all eggs in one basket.
Precisely. For agriculture, a complete rethink of what grows where. Promote investment in climate-smart agriculture, drought-tolerant crops, flood-tolerant varieties, efficient irrigation, sustainable local seed banks.
Adapting the crops to the new reality.
Exactly. In tourism, diversify the product itself. Reduce the overdependence on high-altitude trekking. Develop cultural tourism, health tourism, lower-altitude options less exposed to the direct climate risks.
Spread the focus.
And finally, creating a truly climate-resilient healthcare system, that's paramount.
Yeah.
Integrate climate risks into the national health agenda. Strengthen disease surveillance, especially in those high-altitude areas. Run public awareness campaigns about emerging threats. And crucially, invest robustly in mental health support for affected communities.
So it's about building multiple layers of defense.
That's a good way to put it, a multi-layered defense.
So wrapping up, for Nepal, this climate crisis, It's clearly no longer about, saving glaciers for future generations somewhere down the line.
No, it's immediate.
It's about saving its economy, its communities, its future today.
Right now.
The path forward seems to require not just adapting, but really turning this cascade of failures into a cascade of resilience.
A cascade of resilience. I like that. That's the goal.
So a final thought maybe for you, our listener. What stands out to you when you consider how interconnected our world truly is? How an environmental challenge in one region, like the Himalayas, can ripple through literally every aspect of a nation's life, its health, its identity, its economy, something to mull over.